Welcome everybody to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It is Business Monday. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO of GoLocal. This is the Money Man, Gary Sass, just off a busy weekend of counting change, gold bullion, and every other form of currency. How's your Bitcoins doing?
Bitcoins?
Bitcoins. How are your Bitcoins performing?
That's just a bit. I have no idea.
Well, we missed you before the election. It's hard to believe that the election's only a little while ago, but welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's talk about, I'm going to skip the entire election cycle.
Thank God.
And let's go over to what we are gosh darn thankful for here in Rhode Island economically. What are we thankful for economically?
Economically?
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of things.
It's Thanksgiving week.
Well, good. There's a lot of things we're thankful for. I think we should be thankful for our strong colleges and universities,
Yep.
particularly in a state this size. UI, Brown, PC, Bryant, very strong colleges. I think another thing we should be thankful for that's not often mentioned, but I think it's been true for decades and generations in the state, is we have a good labor force.
Mm-hmm.
We have a labor force that has a good work ethic. Sometimes our politicians let them down because we have a crappy school system, but the work ethic of our labor force is very good, and a lot of states would kill for it. So I think we should be thankful for that. I think in a more immediate sense, which is situational, we should be thankful for full employment in this holiday season. It's down below 4%. And I think the fourth thing that we should be thankful for is that jobs and economic development have come to the forefront of the public policy discussion. And whether or not you agree or disagree, I think it's really good and positive that we are talking about improving the competitive position of the state. And we've made some progress. Progress didn't come in 1 or 2 years, but we've made progress. For example, Rhode Island's business tax climate is no longer in the pits. We were in the bottom 10. We're in the 30s now. We say Rhode Island is a high tax state. Not true. Rhode Island is a high property tax state. That is true. But our income tax and our sales tax is about 38. It's about 20% below the national average on an incomes basis. Our income tax is about 2% below the national average on an incomes basis. Considering we're in the Northeast, that's pretty good. That doesn't offset our property tax situation, which is outlandish. It's about 50% above the national average. But we've made progress there. The point is we're not viewed as an anti-business tax state. We kind of beat ourselves saying we have a high tax burden, we have a high property tax, but we don't have a high tax burden here anymore.
Well, can we go back to employment and then we'll go to taxes?
Okay.
It is pretty good news. I understand that we ran a piece last week. You were one of the experts quoted. It was the leading economists in Rhode Island. They all mirrored the same thing, and some raised questions about some of the quality of the jobs that have been produced since the Great Recession of '08. But overall, I think unemployment on Thursday dipped to 3.8% in Rhode Island. 500 new jobs, minimal number, but 500 new jobs recorded for, I guess that was for October. Most people are going to go into Thanksgiving and Christmas feeling at least somewhat optimistic about their future, and they've got checks coming in and they can buy their Thanksgiving turkey and maybe some presents. It's not the perfect situation. Wages are fairly stagnant, a little bit of improvement both nationally and regionally. But that's a pretty good thing to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sense of being, sense of importance, sense of place in society is in many ways in part tied to that sense of self-satisfaction and producing something.
The unfortunate part is you're absolutely right. And at Thanksgiving of 2018, I think full employment is something to be grateful for. The question always becomes, as you look at data, look at labor participation rates, look at growth in GDP, look at the fact that the latest state forecast is between now and 2023, our average rate of job growth is only going to be 0.7%, about 7,500 jobs over a 5-year period. We're not out of the woods, but in terms of being thankful today, there'll be plenty to buy the turkey down the table. There'll be plenty of money to buy Christmas gifts. Whether we're dealing effectively with structural problems, or whether this is being driven, by a national cycle or what's not clear, and economists can argue about that. But as of today, we should be thankful for full employment. That always was not the case here.
Obviously, one checkpoint is Massachusetts economy. In October, that economy produced 4,400 new jobs. And we were up in Boston this weekend, and Seaport area, there are buildings on top of buildings. I mean, the governor talks about cranes down here. I think we have one or two. Every block in the Seaport district of Boston has 7 or 8. I mean,
But that's why we don't have them. They're all up there. They can't. No,
couldn't we rent a couple?
No.
Couldn't we borrow them on the weekends from Governor Baker, something like that?
No, that's 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 the issue, and we're talking about what we're being thankful about, and no reason to be political. There are questions that we debate as to whether or not we're making the right investments and whether the investments will be sustainable. That's a different issue. But we are making efforts to improve our economy. I mentioned taxes. I also can mention job training. The program that was put in place a few years ago, Real Jobs Rhode Island, is a demand-driven workforce program. Working much better with industry than we have in the past. And so that's been a positive step. So yeah, we're making some progress. Not in some areas I think may not be sustainable, but some areas very sustainable. We're fully employed. We have strong colleges and universities. We have to figure out how to use them better than we have for economic development. And we have good people with a strong ethic of the workforce. So that's pretty good building blocks to go from, and we should be thankful, and we always don't recognize them.
Let's go to taxes. You talk about corporate. On the more corporate side, we're competitive. We may not be national leaders by any way, but we're in a competitive mode. But then the household, the individual household gets hit. Maybe not quite as bad as it used to as we roll back the car tax, the proverbial car tax. Speaker Mattiello was on last week, I believe, with news editor Kate Nagel, and he said, listen, this legislative session is all about the economy and improving the economy and improving the budget situation. What can he do up there this cycle that can help revamp, improve, either marginally or significantly?
Well, the car tax is a good thing, but it's not the game changer that the speaker says it is.
Yeah.
Car tax probably amounts to about 10% of the property tax bill average.
Doubled his margin of victory from 85 votes to about 100, and nearly doubled it.
And I haven't looked at the reason why, but I would suspect $1.5 million the Democrats spent on Get Out the Vote campaign helped. And I would imagine all the progressives back in Steve Frias probably didn't help Steve Frias. So there are a lot of reasons. But the car tax was the right thing to do, but it's not a game changer. Doesn't put that much more money back in your pocket. I think if the speaker was serious about wanting to deal with tax issues to improve the economy, he should focus like a laser on the property tax. There's not much reason we've made the income taxes competitive. The corporate tax rates have been cut. The method of apportioning the tax has been made much more competitive. We've done good things there. We've done good things on employment insurance. Our costs are way down. Property tax has been an outlier. So there are a couple of things I think about doing. First thing we've spoken about before, which is really very important to small business. Every small business on this street or on Main Street everywhere is to get rid of the tangible tax on the property. It phases out over 10 years. It's not cheap. It's probably over $100 million, but it can be phased out like we phased out other taxes. Another thing is to look at the way the property tax is structured. One of Providence's problems, I'm convinced, of the high commercial tax, the 4th or 5th highest, is the way
in the country.
In the country.
This isn't, we're talking Rhode Island. We're not battling it out with Johnston or Central Falls. This is in the United States of America.
Is to look at the way we tax, property. It's antiquated. I worked with Senator Piva-Weed when she was president of the Senate several years ago. We put a property tax cap on. That was work that RIPEC had done with Senator Piva-Weed. It's 4% cap. That's when inflation was running at 6%. So we need to look at that. So it's not cutting the tax per se, but it's changing the rules of the game of how we deal with the property tax. If I was Speaker, I would be thinking very seriously on that. On the sales tax, if you want to put money back in people's pockets, I would kind of poo-poo the ideas of just cutting the rate because we exempt a lot of things anyhow. But if we were the only state that exempted the purchase of new and used vehicles
Right.
from the sales tax, every 3 or 4 years, if somebody bought a $20,000 vehicle, that's $1,500 in their pocket. Those are the kind of game changers that would help John Q. I wouldn't spend a lot of time worrying about business taxes this session. I wouldn't spend a lot of time with the income, both the personal or the corporate. You know, with one exception, you know, we might want to give more of a break to people who pension or Social Security income. We've made progress in that regard. So there's a lot to do, but this is where the rubber hits the road. And this is, I think, you know, an issue that you have to think about. So we've talked about all the things that we've done. Speaker said he's the economic development speaker for the last 4 years, and yet some of the money we're spending and some of the proposal on economic development, we haven't seen the results from those kinds of expenditures yet. But now the governor's come out and she said, and let's put this in a fiscal or economic context. So you and I, being supply side for this conversation, are saying, where can the speaker go to make life better for the middle class on the tax side? We've just mentioned a number of things. But that has to compete with the governor's program. And she hadn't mentioned cutting taxes anywhere. But she wants to implement a full universal pre-K program. She wants to expand the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship Program to Rick and URI to 4-year colleges. She wants to double the size of the state job training, you know, program. She wants to expand the corporate giveaways of Commerce, you know, Rhode Island. One of the issues that she's going to have to address soon, I'm sure she's begun to, and others will force it, is education reform. Those things that are not going to come cheap. So now we add to the list how we make the state more tax friendly, and it has to compete with those expenditures, whether it's a tax.
No, listen, I agree with you. I mean, Mike DeBiase was here, I don't know, during the budget cycle and said, hey, listen, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem.
And the spending problem magnifies as you look into the out years because we haven't seen the final report of the Revenue Estimating Conference to know what the actual numbers are in terms of net, both with expenditures and revenues, but we know a couple of things. We know that this year the deficit that has to be closed between now and the end of the fiscal year is $42 million.
Right.
We know that that deficit came primarily, and just about with the exception of $5 or $6 million, came primarily from departments overspending their budgets. We know that the departments that overspent their budgets to the greatest degree were the social service departments, behavioral health, your Medicaid, DCYF. There were some in other places, but those are the big dollars.
Well, heck, it was an election year.
Well, that's the point.
You're not going to deny anybody overtime. You're not going to deny a vacancy.
These weren't overtime. These were dealing with some of the tragedies that existed at DCYF. They were where we had underfunded Medicaid. We'd underfunded DD programs, developmentally disabled programs.
Right.
But that's the philosophy and the mindset. And then people both on the left and right talk about school reform. The governor has a litany of things she wants to do. That
listen, the governor's going to run the Democratic Governors Association, I believe, is in her, and the Democrats running as an agenda for gearing up for the 2020 presidential race, including the governors, are going to need to talk about some level of fiscal functionality. It can't just be all, tax and spend, tax and spend. That'll ensure Republican Trump will win re-election. So doesn't she have to come forward with some thoughtful budget structures? She did lose some money on the failure of Twin River and the other vendor, IGT, to get the sports betting up and going.
Is it going yet?
It is not going yet. It is supposed to go sometime this week. According to experts in Las Vegas, they say it may cost Rhode Island a substantial amount of money, that about 50% of all sports gaming, sports betting takes place literally in this block of time in which we were dark and we're supposed to be light. We lost the beginning of the NFL season, a lot of Super Bowl bets, beginning of basketball, beginning of college basketball, beginning of the NHL, and the entire World Series. You almost lost everything during this period of time. And now, of course, college football. There's a lot of smart money on Florida State. We'll go to that next week. We'll skip over that this week.
That's another thing we have to be grateful for. And
The
God,
victory over Boston College.
no, God's a no. That's what I want you to know. But but that's part of it. But that's the problem of how you put 10 pounds into a 5-pound bag. They were campaign promises made. This is not anything that we imaginating, as they would say. Universal pre-K. When Angel Tavares talked about that when he ran for governor, I did some work with that campaign. That was $25 million.
Yeah.
The scholarship programs for URI and RIC. I don't know how much more, but it's several millions of dollars. The car tax is costing more than we thought the phase-out would be. Part of the deficiency in the Department of Revenue budget was additional car tax phase-out cost, but was estimated. Education reform. I know people are looking at that. Doubling the JAWS programs. And then on top of that, you have a deficit that you have to close this year. You have projections which show out-year deficits for the very simple reason. There's one reason, is spending is growing quicker than revenue, and the reason spending is growing quicker than revenue are twofold. The entitlement programs, like everywhere else, and that second, some of the economic development programs that are being touted, their own forecasts. These are not forecasts of any economists, that the average growth in jobs will be about 0.7% a year. That's 7,500 jobs be created between now and 2023.
But in some level of fairness, we're at record employment. I mean, I'm sure there are some folks who haven't re-entered the workforce since, but we are at full employment. Some people may want to trade up, but there's not a lot of room for. And we also have the most stagnant population virtually in the United States.
Oh, that's a real. We have to talk about the demographics yet, because demographics are destiny. No, but this is the interesting thing about the.
Did you say demographics are destiny?
I said that.
That's a pretty good line.
Where'd you get that?
I don't know. That's the headline for tomorrow's story.
Ronald Reagan, I think.
Yeah.
But the issue that we don't know, we have full employment, as we've spoken before. We are grateful for that. But is the full employment reflecting, first in, last out?
Yeah.
Or are we really making the structural changes? And there are a couple of things that we do know. This is based on longitudinal, data. We know that health and education service industries are being cut back. We're starting from a lower base. We know, based on a Georgetown University study, this is between 1991 and I think 2016 or 2017, we lost more good-paying, blue collar jobs than anybody else. Not even Mississippi.
Anytime you rank lower than Mississippi, you are in big trouble. Mississippi and West Virginia, you're just in trouble.
But those are the points. So those are the structural problems we have. And our goal has to be, are we making, the sun's shining right now.
Right.
Are we doing the things that when the recession comes, and there will be a recession, you could look at what's happening in Europe right now.
Yeah.
When the recession comes, will the unemployment rate jump from 3.7 to 4.5, which is very manageable?
Yeah.
Or,
will we go to 7% or something like that?
And that's what we don't know. And that's the great gamble that's being taken.
Right.
Are the programs that we put in place are going to have the return. Some are having the return. Tax policy has been great. I think the Real Jobs program has been very good in looking at the workforce demand by business and industry. I think some of the tax credits, the qualified jobs credit, is going to be productive because it's tied to jobs actually being created. But are some of the building hotels, building residential apartments, they're good construction jobs right now, but
they're not going on and on and on.
And then where is the leadership that talks about the one or two things that can begin to change the game for us? And that's the question. It's a good economy. We have full employment. Hopefully, we're making the kind of investments now when things go bad that some of the gains we've made during the good times are sustainable. They're not going to be 100% sustainable, but they're more sustainable than they've been in the past.
Demographics are what?
Destiny.
Demographics are destiny. Let's go to demographics are destiny. We've got 1 million people in the state of Rhode Island.
Yes, I think a little over 1,055,000, something like that.
10 years ago, we had 1,055,000. 20 years ago, we had 1,042,000 or whatever it was. 40 years ago, we had 1,000,000.
It's not.
So, is Women and Infants not doing its job?
No,
Are the bartenders not doing their job? Is Trinity not having enough romantic evenings? Capriccios, who is to blame for the fact that we have no children?
I'm not going to even attempt to go there. But the demographic thing is really, it's not just the numbers, it's the makeup of the population.
Well, I get that.
I'm not going into the question
I
you
got that
asked.
the rich people all moved
No,
to
I'm
Florida.
not. No, you.
Half the Boss ownership who used to live in Rhode Island all
No,
took
that's
their
not the.
money
That's not the.
and avoided taxes.
That's not the.
Rich guys like you next. Saul Kaplan's up next. I'm sure he's eyeing some beautiful house down in
Tennessee.
West Palm. Or
No,
something
Tennessee.
Like that.
No tax.
Let's just go to the numbers. We can't even get poor people to move here.
No, well, the problem is, and you cut me off because I wasn't going to talk about rich people leaving and poor people coming in, though there is that factor involved.
But not enough poor people coming in.
But it's becoming an aging population, and so we're developing a population that's more dependent, and the basic law of markets and a basic law of economic growth is you have to have people to serve. You have to grow people. And so as we become a society, a state, with more, and then not because they're poor, they're older.
But think of this. When we had 1,000,000 people, when we hit the million person mark, the country had about 180 million, 190 million people. We're now at 330 million Americans, and we still have 1,000,000 people. So it means some of the other states grew at a slightly higher percentage.
You just look at where the congressional delegations, congressional come.
They're going to change the Constitution to make it one senator from each state. From states with low.
Well, some people argue that if we lost a representative, we would be hurt, but the country would benefit. So you have to think about that. But no, it's the aging of the population. It's a labor force participation of people in the prime working ages between 25 and 54. So when I say demographics is destiny, the first obvious thing to look at is the population growing. No, it's not, and that creates issues for us, because if I want to locate a business here, I need workers.
One of the leading conservatives has a mindsetter piece today about the dangers of the caravan and the cost of taking care of people who come through the caravan. Rhode Island needs the caravan to come directly here. We need people.
We need productive people, right? Because we've spoken before that because of our liberal nature, a lot of our spending is driven by social service programs, by entitlements, et cetera. And so we need people that will. And I'm not talking about reducing those services.
Well,
we just need people.
Let's just talk about young, smart people. Providence DMA is the has the second highest exodus of college grads of any metropolitan area in the country. Only Detroit has a higher percentage. Roughly 70% of Brown, RISD, Johnson & Wales, PC, URI students leave the state as soon as they're done. I was out yesterday with a friend. He's got a 22-year-old college grad. Every single one from his high school class just graduated from college. None of them barely coming back to Rhode Island. 2 out of the bunch. Why aren't we attractive to getting them back here? Is it lack of opportunity? Is it not enough cool companies? Is it?
I don't know, and I think Saul Kaplan can answer that question much better than I can. He's thought about that more than I have. So I can only give you.
Is that saying that Saul is cooler than the money man?
Oh, no question about that. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, there are a lot of complicating factors, and it's a question of chicken and egg. So if there was something to draw those people to stay here, the young people, we'd get a larger share to stay here. Not sure that they see that those opportunities exist. Yeah,
should commerce shift? Should that be? They do some interesting things. They do the Wave Maker
program. That's a good program.
Which is a good program. Should they really juice that up? Is that really where the emphasis needs to be to really build a younger, more vibrant economy, start to grow the demographics of the state a little bit, and also improve. Listen, you get a bunch of smart kids from great colleges and universities. You're going to get more productivity. You're going to get some additional advantages, and also this might be the place that more companies want to come and locate because there's a pipeline.
Well, I don't know the answer to the question, but the obvious answer is a little more complex. And it's we have to have higher, better performing, schools. You can talk about the college-educated kids, particularly in the STEM, areas
Yep.
that leave, but it's a combination of things. It's keeping those people, but it's also attracting others to be part of the labor force, to build scale. And one of the big issues I see in economic development in Rhode Island is we do some interesting things, but we do very few things at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not doing things at scale, somebody's going to come down and eat your lunch. It's like the big fish eating the small fish.
Gotcha. Listen, Gary Sass, the money man.
My pleasure.
Thank you for all your thankfulness. Thank you for being a part of Go Local Live. We will hope you have a great Thanksgiving with your family. And let me ask you one quick Zen question. Who's better, Florida State or the Citadel?
You should ask me who's better, LSU, a lot of teams in the Citadel. No, the only thing that really matters is what happens this weekend in Tallahassee.
And that would be Florida State.
Yes.
And that's really
that's the
bragging
center.
rights.
Boy, Boston thinks they're the center of the universe. I get to tell them it's Tallahassee, Florida.
I attended the game.
Harvard, Yale?
Yeah, I was there.
That was at Fenway Park, wasn't it?
I'm amazed they even let a URI grad into the place.
But well, as long as you pay, they're not choosy.
No,
but now tell me about the football game at Fenway Park. How was it? How was the?
You know what? Anything. Here's my view from going to concerts there. Anything in Fenway Park is fun. It's Fenway Park. I'm sure Chicago folks feel that way about Wrigley. Just anything there. It's such a cool, unique experience. We were also sitting about the 15-yard line right next to the Harvard undergrads, which made it wildly entertaining.
Well, just as long as none of the halfbacks running into the monster.
Yeah, that's right. Gary Sass, the Money Man, thanks so much. We're going to take about a 30-second break. We'll be back with Saul Kaplan, Business Innovation Factory, here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to the Navigant extravagant credit union broadcast center. It is Business Monday, back from the West Coast, from the East Coast. I don't even know all the places he's been. Saul Kaplan, Business Innovation Factory, the biggest innovator going. What's going on? Welcome back.
It's really busy, and I'm glad to be home in Rhody for the holiday, which is good. I don't know. I shouldn't travel this much. I'm getting too old. Getting too old for this. But it's a busy time. You know, go figure. Everybody knows that they need to innovate.
Yeah.
And is struggling with it. You know, probably later than they should have been focused on it. But good news for folks like me that have been pretty persistent and consistent.
You've been talking about this for a little while, haven't you? This whole innovation thing?
You know, it's the old, a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So, you know, if I just stay on it long enough, sooner or later the market will come my way, right?
Let's go around the world. There's been so much going on. We've missed you immensely. I don't even know which hotbed. Let's go to Amazon.
Okay.
So it's been interesting. Obviously, Amazon has finally announced that they're splitting HQ2 to New York and to Northern Virginia, D.C. metro area, Crystal City, which is really Washington, D.C. I mean, it's across a bridge.
For all intents and purposes.
Yes, absolutely. And two of the most vibrant economies, and I'll say D.C. is almost recession-proof, just because the federal government and so many things going on there. New York is ebbs and flows a little bit more with financial services, but kind of a disappointment after going through collecting the data of 200 and something cities and just going to the absolute no.
Disappointment to who? The communities that didn't get the
For the prognosticators, for guys standing
folks
up
who
in
wanted
windows.
it to be some like out of left field decision that they could criticize. You mean?
How about this? That it was a missed opportunity as a business leader in America to go to some place where he could really make a difference, a Detroit or a place that he could create a destination and revamp an entire economy. And that he is so big, 50,000 people, high-paying jobs, any place he goes would be a positive to that area.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think they made a really smart move on both splitting it, and I'll talk about that second, but just the decision they made, you know, to be in the Beltway.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually think they waited too long for this move. You already see the backlash to these big technology companies,
right.
These big platforms that are taking huge chunks of commerce in our society.
Yeah.
And we sit back and say, how did we let this happen? But it has happened, and it delivers a lot of value, but there's a negative edge to the sword. And so if you're Amazon, you had better be building relationships, you know, in Washington and with state houses across the country, right? Because in the end, this thing is going to settle out where it has to be good for society, has to be good for communities, and we have to mitigate against the consequences of innovation that affect real people's lives.
From the man who champions bird scooters racing down sidewalks, knocking over old ladies by millennials without helmets on.
Well,
this is a transformation.
No,
this is almost a blasphemy. It's almost anti-innovation.
I believe first and foremost that we
if you can innovate the monopoly, why can't you just keep going?
We need to innovate in every walk of life, right? But we need to do it with our eyes wide open about the consequences of innovation and the people who get left behind as others get the value of moving forward, right? And so we're always going to be that kind of country, right? Where we're going to care about the consequences, but we need to first and foremost grow and get stronger and more prosperous, and then we need to figure out how to do it in a much more inclusive way so that we're not leaving people behind. We need to look at these new technologies, and we have to look at the negative edge of the sword and how technologies, which I've always said are agnostic, right? They don't by themselves create good or evil. It's up to us humans. It's up to our governments. It's up to our communities to engage around using technology for good, right? And
so they're going to be no Prime boxes over there on Elm Grove Avenue delivering holiday presents.
No, look, I don't buy this notion notion of with the way we solve the problem is not to innovate. I like
So
what Jeff Bezos
so
is
do we
doing.
need
Yeah.
some antitrust cracking of the whip on? Let's just go right to them. Amazon. I mean,
Well, you
listen.
depend-
You functionally cannot buy most things at stores that 5 years ago you could. You want a size 9.5 Nikes. Most stores aren't going to carry the inventory.
Yeah, well, I do think that we've got to pay attention to anti-competitive behaviors and antitrust, right? But I don't think we can use that as a broad brush instrument, to get in the way of innovation, right? I think we can have both and. I think we can constantly celebrate new models, how technology improves our lives, but we can also keep our eyes wide open when single platforms or single entities start to command a huge part of society and commerce. There are consequences to that, and if Amazon knows this, and they know that there's...
So are they going to
backlash, right?
Washington to have more political capital?
Absolutely.
Okay. And they're going to New York City to have more
and they-
influence on financial services in the
The
market?
reason I think they split it
Yeah.
was because, look, right, the capacity and the consequences of adding 50,000 employees into one metro area. There's not enough talent to go around, right? And they also need to spread the relationship base, not just in one location. So you're going to see them invest in a lot of places and
Yeah.
invest very heavily in a lot of relationships. I think the Virginia play, I'm not surprised by the New York part of it, but I had been predicting the DC Beltway all along for exactly this reason.
Should they have done that, Newark play to help resuscitate functionally the metro New York area, but help impact an area that's economically deprived?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have mixed feelings about whether we...
I mean, as a corporate citizen, did Jeff Bezos have an obligation or have an opportunity to change the perception about big tech companies by not going someplace where the fact that they go there would have had such a positive economic impact on that community or that region?
I think it's less about where they put functions of their organization, and it's more about how the technology gets deployed into every community and the implications of what that means for every community and how it affects real people.
Yep.
If they displace a certain type of retail operation because they deliver better quality for less money to more consumers, that's fantastic for those consumers. They have to realize that if they displace something that was there before that didn't innovate,
Yep.
they don't apologize for it, but they need to be aware of it, and they have to help mitigate the consequences of that. Because if they don't, there's going to be huge pushback, and you can already start to see that now, right? You can already hear them talking in Washington and in state houses.
Absolutely.
And you're going to see more and more actions taken against it, and Amazon's going to have to spend more and more time doing what they should have been doing all along, which is building those community relationships.
Let's go to Facebook. Facebook's probably had, I didn't look at the stock today, but he's on a pretty good roll of negative press. And then the utterance of anybody who talks to the media, I'm going to fire, probably not the best thing to get caught on the record saying. I've always argued that Facebook is, in my lifetime, the most brilliant platform. It does unbelievably unique things, not replicatable. But that Facebook's danger was Facebook itself, that it would get too greedy, too manipulative. And have we now hit that level, not just Cambridge Analytica and that data analysis and ability to share it and sell it to third parties, but also this sort of corporate arrogance that is now starting to seep out and get a very negative reaction?
Well, it's a similar issue in that here's a big platform that grew out of nowhere, and all of a sudden we wake up and it's affecting everything, including our elections, right? So now we got to all of a sudden say, okay, what's going on here? We could second guess why did we allow it to happen, but really what we need to do is figure out how we're going to go forward,
right?
And they're not helping themselves, certainly not recently in this regard. I feel a little differently about Facebook. They're very business model. What they do is based on surveillance. It's based on capturing all this information.
100%.
And they say it explicitly. The way we make money is we take all of this information, which you provide to us, we package it, and we resell it back to advertisers.
And part of their argument is it's better for you. You care about sailing. You get to see sailing ads. You don't have to watch about a Dodge Ram pickup truck. You don't want a Dodge Ram pickup truck. You want information about sailing. You want to get your wife a cool sailing jacket. You want new sneakers to go sailing.
That's how they sold it.
Absolutely.
That's how they sold it, but that's not what's come to fruition. There's an ever-increasing need to get more and more data that they can continue to sell in.
Yep.
And, of course, the negative or the negative edge of the sword, the bad part of this where folks that are trying to use the information to manipulate, and all the way up to including our election process, and then to have Facebook step back and try to claim a high road, to say they're just a platform, right, is not going to fly. It isn't flying.
But let's go this way. There's 1.2 billion televisions in the world.
Right.
There's 2.4 billion Facebook users. Most Facebook users, 70+%, have used it in the last 30 days. Okay, so we're talking about roughly 1.9, 1.8 global users of Facebook. We had a story about a very distressed apartment complex in Johnston. It struck a chord with people via social media, predominantly Facebook. It got 27,000 reads this week, right? No other way could have that been distributed in 2018 and realize that many people. And it was a different demographic in many ways than we often see. And it was a lot of people talking about how difficult it is to rent a safe, affordable apartment place and the lack of enforcement on these issues. So in that way, I go, God, without Facebook, how could a community have a discussion about it? Well, look at the pressure that it's going to put on elected officials. So on the flip side is, listen, you sign up, it literally says, everything you put on here is ours.
Right.
And then you complain later. Guys like you, innovators like you, complaining.
Well, a lot of folks that I know, I haven't done this yet, I still get a lot of value, right? I can't relate to Facebook, but I get a lot of value. I don't mean business value, I mean engagement and connection value.
Get to see your
I get to see where you engage.
grandchildren and post pictures and
right. But here's the thing: a lot of the people that are in the innovation circles, particularly the socially conscious folks that we hang around with at BIF, they're starting to drop off. Like they're the early folks that are starting to say, "Wait a minute."
But what's the better mousetrap? Who's got the mousetrap?
Well, that's the problem.
And every time there's a better mousetrap, Facebook buys it.
But I think what's going to
Instagram.
happen, and this is my disappointment in Facebook's leadership.
Yeah.
Right, because they made more money than
Does Zuckerberg need to go?
No, well, I think maybe ultimately he will, because what he didn't take his shot at doing was recognizing the flaw in the business model.
Just see what the stock market did today.
Literally, he could have proactively transitioned the business model to where it's our information. We control it. If we want it to go to advertisers, we opt in. Maybe we benefit from that if we want to do it.
Down 6% today.
He could have changed his model. It would have cost him a lot of money, but it's going to cost him a lot of money anyway. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So I really fault Zuckerberg for trying to stick to the business model without recognizing the flaws in what they did. It's a big problem.
He miss the opportunity coming off those congressional hearings, made a lot of promises, said he was going to revisit things, and what it appears to be, did nothing. Now, here's the other factor. Third quarter, revenue flying, right? This is not this is no GE. We'll get to GE in a minute.
Well, no, listen, but you say this is no GE.
Yeah.
But this is the early stages, and I see some troubled signs. I really
do. But they don't have
any ability, right, to be self-aware enough, the leadership, right, to be able to say, we got some serious problems here. They're still playing, even those congressional hearings, right, those things were scripted. They didn't get to ask the questions, nor were our representatives capable of asking the right questions. To be honest,
Steve Peoples from AP, who used to write at the Providence Journal, had the best tweet of all time. The first 4 speakers, the chair and minority members of the 2 committees spoke. The average age was 78 years old.
No, it was scary to me just how unsophisticated the line of questioning was, and the way they could deflect it, Facebook.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they scored any points in terms of sentiment to say, hey, they get the problem, they're going to work to fix it, even at the consequences, of their own quarterly earnings, okay, so what if, $10 billion comes off of his network? Like, it doesn't matter to him, and yet he continues to take this road.
I got to tell you, if I lost $10 billion in my net, for guys like you and Mark Zuckerberg, it doesn't matter. Let's go to GE. GE, I'm going to go 3 years ago, was arguably the most successful company in the world, had the best reputation in the world. Every city, you talk about HQ2, the idea of the potential of GE moving to your city was a death fight. The fact that Providence made it to a second or third round was, attaboy, pat ourselves in the back. And now I'm not sure you want them moving next to you because they're not going to even mow their own lawn. They're not going to rake the leaves. This is a company literally falling apart in 12 months before our very eyes. Have you ever? I don't think.
That's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing, and it's really an incredible lesson in innovation. Throughout their whole history, they've been a company that's been about innovation. They've transformed so much.
They did a great job with that light bulb, right?
Yeah, and then even the innovation, just from an organization and management standpoint, a lot of the practices that served that era,
A's, B's, and C's,
all came out of that. Well, guess what? It's all been disrupted. And when they figured it out that they had to make digital central and start to reposition some of these industrial age businesses, they waited way too long to do it. I had the opportunity recently, to talk with Beth Comstock, who recently retired there. She ran all of their innovation effort. Imagine being responsible for innovation across that.
330,000 employees.
And Immel, he really tried to organize and move it, but it was too little, too late.
He was there for 15 years.
You know how long it takes to move a Queen Mary, kind of steamboat?
I don't know. If he had been there 5 years, I might buy into that one. 15 years, I think you own the Queen Mary.
Okay, so you don't give Immel to pass.
I do not give him and the fact that he had the extra jet following him around just in case there was problems with the first jet, I don't know if that was the bastion of innovation other than, but also I think you're starting to see questions of real fiscal, potentially fraud now coming out, a wildly underfunded pension, and
all the things you do over all the time to try to to get to the other side, all of a sudden come back to haunt you. And to your point, it happens really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, this downside at General
Listen,
Electric,
Sears took 30 years for what GE's happened in 12, 15 months.
I do believe that it's going to look more like that on the downside, which is scary. That in the old days, it used to be you took a long time to build the position, and then you could make a lot of mistakes and survive them, and it would be very slow on the downside. I think we're in this era of rapid cycling, right?
Well,
where you're gonna see companies, like Uber that form and they're nothing, and then you look up and they're $10 billion, and then you're gonna see it just as fast, on the other side. Did you see? I don't know if you saw Jeff Bezos' quote. Go back to Amazon for a second. This week at some event he was at, he declared. He said, Amazon is going to fail in front of the whole big audience, and it's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
And what our job is as a leadership team is to try to delay it, and the way we delay it, the inevitable failure, is by a relentless focus on customer experience, and making sure that there's no substitute for delivering an incredible experience to a customer. Pretty smart.
RJ Agwal at Bain, he's head of venture, told me a few years ago, he said, listen, the trouble for us in venture is we used to look at companies and they were 15 years up and 15 years down.
Right.
So we had a lot of opportunity to make a lot of money. He said now, life cycle's 3 years up, 3 years down.
Right.
If you don't catch it on the early stage in success, you've lost all the money.
And so that cycle, that rapid cycle, is facing all of us, right?
Right.
And so how do you lead in that environment versus the one that you were accustomed to, right? How do you lead in rapid cycles where you got to take advantage and be positioned for the upside, right? Because there's an inevitable downside that's happening. Same thing with our economy. I mean, we see that, right? And you know, we've talked about this many times. I mean, it's what Rhode Island has to get much better at, right? So that we're not the first one in and last one out of every recession, right? In order to do that, right, you have to take advantage of the upside to
Right.
make the structural changes, to experiment with different approaches that you could then start to put in place so that you're more resilient when the next inevitable downturn happens. It's true for companies, it's true for communities, and frankly, it's true for us as individuals too, isn't it?
Let's go to Hasbro. Lots of rumors flying,
Yeah.
but we got reports from a meeting within the inner circle of Hasbro. CEO came a few weeks ago to a company-wide meeting, announced the layoffs, but also made some other announcements. One, that there was going to be more consolidation within Rhode Island. And second of all, that a significant portion of the company's efforts were going to move to the West Coast. That's what we were told took place in that meeting. Is this... You know, this is not like trying to keep the Paw Sox here and maybe we give them, you know, an extra $5 million to stay in Rhode Island versus go to Worcester. Their future, in many ways, is tied to the entertainment industry, and there isn't a lot we can do to change that. I mean, we could build the Providence sign and put it up on a hill or something like that, but the entertainment industry is pretty well implanted in California.
Well, this isn't, fortunately, it's not an either or choice.
Yep.
They're going to have facilities in both locations.
Right.
And so now it's about being strategic to their business, understanding what they're trying to do, you know, and making sure that your environment, the community, is contributing in a strategic way. I think you're right. In the end, this doesn't come down to who can write the biggest incentive check. I mean, we saw that in the Amazon HQ2 stuff. I mean, Maryland offered them $9 billion to move 60 miles, you know, further this way,
Right.
and they still went with less incentives for the more strategic reason.
Not that they went for no incentives.
No, there's going to be incentives, and that's going to be true here too.
Right, there were pretty good wins.
Yeah, fortunately at a smaller scale because
Yeah.
we're Rhode Island, but that'll be true here too. It's not about how big is the incentive check, it's about what are they trying to do here strategically, how do we work with them in a way that gets them the right workforce they need here, access to the right location for the facility, you know, not having to deal with too much of a pain in the ass around permitting, you know, and approvals.
Well,
do
you know,
stuff,
tonight
right?
there's another fight.
Yep.
There's a vote tomorrow night on the Fane Tower, and I don't mean to mix the two, but, you know, in conversations, we went up to Toronto and we saw
saw it,
Fane's
right?
building, and then called Fane afterwards. By the way, Fane's 47-story tower in Toronto is the 4th tallest building on that city block.
Just on the block.
Okay, that's not the high skyscraper area. That's down by the river. That area is up by the universities. Every building is that tall, or they're being torn down to replace it because they understand that they've got to get density and go up
Right.
to meet the economic
I thought
demands
that's
of
what
that
we wanted to
community.
do here.
I thought so too. Lo and behold,
I thought we wanted
we
more
want
density
everything to look like
downtown.
Benefit Street, but
Apparently not there.
right.
No.
But he's 2 years into this thing and is just
Right.
getting his first height variance approved.
Yeah.
He hasn't even gone through anything else. Forget the other permitting requirements that he's going to have to go through.
We keep going back to what happened with Amazon, but I'm sure you noticed that for the New York deal, they pulled the responsibility almost completely out of Mayor de Blasio's hands and moved it up. Cuomo took it at the state commerce level.
Absolutely.
Right? just for that reason alone, that there was no way in hell that they were going to win that thing if it had to go through all the city stuff. And de Blasio tried to put a good face on it.
Right. If you were getting a bribe from the electrical inspector, imagine what the bribe would be on HQ2. Right, if the pizza place is $5,000 in cash, the bribe for the electrical inspector in New York for that must be $50 million.
Even the legal process,
right?
Never mind,
the illegal process.
Never mind any hint of that. But you look at, we could imagine. We even heard rumblings here in Rhode Island, right, up at the State House.
I think those are still pending.
You either get this thing right at the city level,
yeah.
right, or we're going
taking
to pull
it
it back up. It's state property anyway, right?
Should it be at the state level? Is it that you allow yourself to be NIMBYized, small groups, Providence Preservation Society dropped off 1,800 signatures. I mean, I worked with Antoinette Downing 25 years ago when I worked for John Chafee. I just don't remember Antoinette Downing weighing in on new construction projects that were outside the areas that were historic in nature. A virgin piece of land functionally. I just don't remember her weighing in on things like the Citizen building over there being built, which was towards the tail end of her life.
The state has most of the cards,
yeah.
Obviously. It's
right.
not like the city has a lot of resources to be able to do it. But I think the right answer is it should be city and state, and they should figure out how to work together and make the right compromises to enable economic development.
Right.
But if it turns out that the city is going to block economic development that's really important, not just to Providence, but to the whole state,
right.
then the state's going to come in, and the state has a lot of leverage in this, particularly, because it's the 195 piece. It has all the incentive programs and ability to do it. And with one piece of legislation, and you tell me how influential the Providence local delegation is in working up at the State House right now. It's not like it used to be.
Well, no, other than Ruggiero, who's the one who's the sponsor of it, there's very few in the leadership, and even more so, I think there's a huge frustration at the state level of the myopic viewpoint of what some of the decision making that's coming out of Providence at a city hall. So I think, what I understand is if this doesn't get approval, don't even come up to visit us this coming session because we can't work with you. So
I believe that this is going to get done. There's still more to go in the process, right? There's a $300 million investment into the downtown area with density, right? Willingness to make some compromises.
Right.
They'll go through a design review like any development would have
yeah,
to go.
absolutely, and
I'm
should.
sure it won't be pleasant, but it'll be an important process, and good will come out of that.
Yeah.
In terms of the final design and what happens. But I think we needed to get the midterm elections behind us, and now some dominoes are starting to fall there. But yeah, there are some parallels with some of these other national players. You've got to welcome investment into your community, and you've got to be willing to listen to ideas that come from the outside, right? Rather than just trying to fit them. This argument that, we need this more than we need that.
Yeah,
like,
right.
what does that have to, this is what this guy wants to invest
right.
in, right?
Absolutely.
You can't hold him hostage because we have some other community need over
right.
here that we're trying to deal with. I don't.
One of the more intellectually dishonest presentations that I've seen, and also the lack of initiatives being put forth to push for affordable housing. Vane doesn't have anything to do with affordable housing. There's lots of strategies to improve affordable housing. I don't think we want to tie that every time there's a project, no one will come here. I mean, there's plenty of choices for developers to go to places and realize.
The problem is that you want enough affordable housing at the city level, or maybe
100%.
even at the neighborhood level. Maybe even you come down lower. The problem is when you're talking about a single deal,
right?
Like how do you get to the macro, the aggregate, the metric that you're trying to get to. So we'll see. We'll see where the Fane Tower goes. I'm not surprised that it moved to the next step. I still think there's a lot of steps to go through.
I agree.
And we better be careful to make sure. You referenced the Paw Sox deal,
right?
And then how we keep Hasbro.
Yeah.
Like, don't do it like you did the Paw Sox deal, right? Like, actually make them think that you care.
Yeah, that's right.
That they stay here. That would be a nice. That would be a nice step to take.
Last week. we've got about 2 minutes left. You've been traveling the country working on a new initiative for BIF on really rethinking some aspects of healthcare. Let's talk about it and give us an update.
Yeah, so I've been on the West Coast 2 separate trips, but both really kind of harnessing my inner geek. I've been focused on Silicon Valley tech. What's the health tech environment look like?
Yeah.
Right. And I stay reasonably close to this, so I mean I know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get immersed in it, so I went to 2 different meetings where I literally immersed myself in folks that are incredibly edgy and smart about artificial intelligence, genomics and where it's going, blockchain and what it might enable, all the buzzwords that we hear, but people that are really at the forefront of deploying those kinds of technologies. And my takeaway after a couple of weeks out there is the technologies most of them are at a stage where it's not futuristic, that we could actually deploy them, right? We could certainly explore them at a smaller scale to see what might work at the larger scale. And that there's an opportunity to do that in a way that's human-centered, that's about lighting up patients and families and individuals, as opposed to just how do we use the technology to entrench the current institutions
Right.
in the system, which is going to happen anyway.
Is this a little...
Right. So, my whole bent is, what if all these technologies were in service of us as consumers, us as patients or students? And I've come away from these trips with a lot of enthusiasm that these technologies are, 1, ready to be deployed, 2, being the emphasis is too much on just the technology as the holy grail, which it's not, and too much focused on the institution as opposed to the end user. So I'm excited about the opportunity and look forward to continuing to flush that out.
Will we see a separate BIF conference that's more focused on something specialized like this?
Well, I'm going to pull together lots of different groups as we go through the design process, and who knows what kind of entity we might try to form. That's the exciting part, right there.
So it's going to be like that Berkshire Hathaway, J.P. Morgan conglomerate that's coming together, rethinking healthcare insurance?
Wouldn't that be, well, maybe they'd be a good candidate to partner with us or invest in it. So
Jonathan Nelson's got to have the same issues, just right across the street.
Well, the thing is, everyone has the same issues. And the minute you say, like when someone says they're a healthcare expert, you say, okay, that's great. But when you talk to the people who don't claim to be healthcare experts, everybody has a story about themselves, their family, the experience with the healthcare system, and there's so much low-hanging fruit to improve this thing. I'm sure we're going to have plenty of opportunity.
That's great. Thank you as always. So glad you're back.
You're welcome.
Happy Thanksgiving week.
To you too.
Tomorrow, Kate Nagel will be back at the 4 o'clock hour, and we'll be running tomorrow and Wednesday, off on Thursday and Friday. Look forward to seeing you back tomorrow at 4 o'clock on GoLocal Live. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into Business Monday at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton. He's Saul Kaplan. Have a great night.